Hello everyone, this is part 27 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. As Naruto raced through the village, getting closer and closer to Fu and Haku, his vision, through Yagura's ability, grew clear enough that he could make out their individual forms as opposed to just their chakra signatures, which were worryingly weak. With it, although he was barely concentrating on anything other than his two friends, he was also able to notice the three Kage emerging from the forest atop the rooftop, although each in a different direction. It seemed the Tsuchikage had somehow tricked the Kazekage and was now escaping in the direction Orochimaru had gone. For a brief moment Naruto cursed that he was limited in that he couldn't create a shadow clone to follow them. Orochimaru had already left the ranges of his extended senses, racing off at unimaginable speeds that Naruto couldn't hope to match anyway without summoning something to carry him. However, the Tsuchikage would no doubt be going in the same direction, unless they had a plan to break apart after the invasion, even though it failed and a good majority of both the Oto and Iwa shinobi were captured in the sand. Unfortunately, a shadow clone split Naruto's concentration, and even with Shukaku controlling most of the sand for him, with his body simply acting as a proxy, he was still consciously willing the sand to withhold the shinobi. Already he had felt people breaking out, no doubt now trying to free their comrades or flee. He didn't need even more escaping while his concentration was divided. He didn't have long to dwell on it though, although in the back of his mind he was already going through what he should have done the moment the snake Sannin escaped. He realized that he should have summoned something of his own, at least to follow after Orochimaru. However, the man had gone through his hand signs so quickly that his fingers were less than a blur. Unfortunately for him, with the Mizukage's soul only came his memories and feelings, not his years of honed instincts and reflexes. Yagura was ruthless, never allowing an opponent to escape alive unless it was to act as a messenger to further demoralize his opponents. He never would have allowed Orochimaru to escape like that. However, it was not Yagura in charge of the blonde's body, and Naruto just wasn't experienced enough to react. It was useless now though. He didn't want to stop out of worry for his friends, and he couldn't summon while running like this. In the end though, he just had to leave it to the Kazekage and Hokage to deal with. As long as the Tsuchikage was not anybody, he couldn't be further down Naruto's list of concerns when compared to his friends. He finally reached the area they had been fighting in, immediately noticing the damage caused by their fight and the residual chakra in the air that was a result of two Jinchuriki both using their tenant's potent chakra. It took him barely a moment to lock onto Haku and Fuu's fading chakra signatures before he appeared inside the remains of the ruined building they had destroyed. Naruto. He looked around, spotting Haku just managing to keep his eyes open as a soft smile found its way onto the Ice User's tired features. It didn't last long though, as the boy's depleted energy finally seemed to run out, his body slumping uselessly to the side, right next to where Fu was lying in a similar fashion. Naruto managed a fleeting smile as he walked over. By all rights, Haku should have been unconscious well before now, but it was his tenacious will that allowed him to stay awake long enough for him to be sure Fu was going to be safe. With his Rinnegan, Naruto could easily see just how drained the both of them were, their chakra reserves much lower than what any self-respecting medical ninja would deem healthy or even safe. However, that didn't seem to be the extent of their injuries. Fu sported more than a few nasty burns across her body, no doubts from overuse of her Bijuu's virulent chakra. Although he knew those would fade relatively quickly with the girl's advanced healing. Haku on the other hand wasn't so lucky, and the red, blotchy skin on his hands wouldn't be fading any time in the near future. It was a classic sign of Tenketsu overload, and it made Naruto wonder just what kind of opponent the two had been fighting to push them so far. He got his answer quickly though, as he finally took notice of the third chakra signature in the room, buried beneath a good deal of his sand at the center of an oddly formed crater. He realized this must have been the Jinchuriki he had felt earlier, and felt a flutter of pride in his sea for his two friends for defeating such an obviously powerful opponent. It passed though as he walked towards the sand cocoon, a frown marring his features. This man had fought his friends, potentially them if they weren't as strong as they were. Naruto felt very strangely about that, especially when he took into consideration the man was a Jinchuriki. On one hand, he felt as though he should be vengeful, like he should dislike or actively hate the man who had hurt two of his closest friends. However, he just wasn't like that. His friends were alive and would be perfectly fine after some time to recover. Plus, this man was like him, there was no telling what his life had been like due to the burden placed on him. In a way, Naruto wanted to understand, to better know the man before he came to any kind of conclusion. No matter how tempting it was to jump to conclusions just so he could react in some way. His hand hesitated over the sand. He was unconscious. It would be very easy to extract the man's biju right now, take away the power he had used to harm his friends and would have used to harm the shinobi of this village. However, Naruto had grown up. Years ago he had removed Matatabi from Yugito because he thought it was the right thing to do. Despite the evidence of Kiribi that not all Jinchuriki were mistreated, his naive, childish mind couldn't quite accept that at the time. Not to mention he had seen how much happier Shukaku was with him as opposed to tormenting Gaara, even if he mistakenly believed Naruto was his father. While Matatabi always assured him that she in no way resented Naruto for taking her from her host, and was in fact probably happier for it, he had always felt guilty for that. Time had changed him, the bloodline rebellions and his time with Tsunade had changed him. He would like to think he was more mature, that he could at least think before making a rash action like performing a biju extraction on an unconscious man. He sighed wearily, deciding to make a decision later as his hand fell back down to his side tiredly. A soft smile did manage to creep onto his lips though as a thin tendril of sand rose up from the ground near his feet. It was different from the rest of the crumbled earth he had used to secure the shinobi in the village, as it was practically saturated with Shukaku's chakra, even bearing the tanuki's distinctive blue markings. It rose up, the pointed end pointing at him as if the Ichibi himself was looking at Naruto. The blonde just smiled and patted the tendril of sand like he would Shukaku, laughing when it vibrated in satisfaction. He was unprepared then as he suddenly felt liquid fire pouring through his arm. His violet eyes widened in surprise before clenching shut in agonizing pain. He knew what was happening but didn't fully understand why. Somehow the gobi was being absorbed into him without him actually meaning to. However, it was too much, too fast. It wasn't controlled like it normally was, nor was it a slow, gradual process. It felt as though the entire biju was being forcefully shoved down his arm, tearing it open and burning at the fresh wounds. However, if Naruto had thought that pain was manageable, then it was nothing compared to when the chakra finally reached his coils. As a somewhat experienced practitioner of medical ninjutsu, he knew one thing about the chakra coils of a developed human: they were a one-way system. They were where physical energies merged with spiritual energies to form the chakra intrinsic to the individual, but foreign chakra was not supposed to enter. However, with the sheer volume of the biju's chakra entering his system all at once, it had little elsewhere to go, forcefully entering the part of his system it was not supposed to. The young monk almost fell to the ground, feeling as though his insides were combusting excruciatingly slowly, even though he knew it was only seconds. If it weren't for his shakuju steadying him against the suddenly very unstable ground, he would have surely fell to the earth, twitching and writhing from the sheer agony he felt. The worst part was that the thin strand of sand still held firm to his hand, continuously pumping him with the five tails poisonous chakra even as his body begged for release from the burning that was tearing apart his body from the inside. Then, as if a jug had been emptied and had nothing left to give, the pain abated. The seal finally activated, absorbing the copious quanis of the foreign chakra and locking it away deep within its confines. As much good that did Naruto though. He stood there, half leaning on his staff and half clutching it to prevent himself from simply keeling over. Everywhere hurt, from his skin that prickled like there was some residual electrical current running across his body, to his insides that felt like a slowly cooling meal after having just been cooked. His breaths came out ragged and inconsistent as he gulped, finding his mouth dry and rough as he desperately tried to pull himself back to his feet. He couldn't afford this now. Already he could feel people approaching the trio even as the lingering effects of the gobi's chakra lay havoc on his delicate chakra system. He was sure the seal looked like a wreck right now, probably a mess of broken pipes and leaking, corrosive liquid. However, he had to be strong, he had to get his friends away from here before. Dynamic entry. One of the tenuously standing walls of the already thoroughly destroyed building completely caved in, releasing a cloud of dust as a hazy silhouette burst in. Naruto actually found his eyesight to be slightly blurry as he had to blink just to get a clear image. He quickly realized that it was because there were tears in his eyes which he frantically wiped away at the same moment he stood up straight, finding a new surge of energy against the protests of his tired, burning body. He would protect his friends. Guy, I really don't think that was necessary, there was a hole in the wall just over here. The smoke and dust abated enough for Naruto to make out two figures, one proudly standing against the hole he had created and the other slouched near one that had been created in the fight between Han and Fu. Never mind that, my hip friend, we are here to apprehend the unyouthful fiend that holds our village hostage. Naruto narrowed his eyes at that. He wasn't holding the village hostage, he was simply preventing any of the shinobi from fighting and pointlessly throwing away their lives. However, he remained silent, using the opportunity to gather together as much of his erratic chakra as he could. In his state he wouldn't last much longer and he couldn't afford to leave Fu and Haku unprotected. He's also holding the Iwa and Oto shinobi as well, you know. The lazy drawl of the first man's friend see through the still air as the last of the airborne debris settled, revealing the two figures to the dujutsu-bearing blonde. The first was a man wearing the traditional Junin flak jacket of Konoha atop a one-piece green spandex suit sporting a black bowl C and oddly large eyebrows. His friend also wore a Konoha Junin jacket but over the more traditional blue underclothing. His silver hair spiked upward in a gravity-defying display while his headband fell over one eye, leaving his other eye the only thing visible on his face due to the mask he wore. Naruto was sure that if Fu was awake she could instantly recite the names. From their chakra levels and the way they held themselves, they were powerful shinobi. Unfortunately, the blonde lacked his friend's encyclopedic knowledge of the bingo books so could immediately pull the names from thin air. He simply had to settle for the fact that in his weakened, pained condition they were threats. Hell, right now he wasn't even sure if he could manage one of his Deva Paths techniques, just feeling the flow of chakra through his body was painful. Alright kid, it was the second man who spoke, the mysterious one with the silver hair and rather uncaring attitude. Come peacefully with us, there's no need for violence. That's what you were talking about back there, right? Peace. Naruto experimentally flexed his fingers, admirably hiding the wince that followed as pain arced through his arm, setting his nerves aflame. He stayed quiet still, hoping to buy a little more time to recover. He just hoped these men were the talkative sort. Come now, Kakashi. It's much too unyouthful to mock the boy's beliefs like that. I know you must keep to your cool and hip ways, but I personally feel that this boy was expressing himself in the springtime of his youth. Naruto grit his teeth, slowing his breathing and just focusing on the flow of his chakra through his damaged body. He did his best to ignore the inane conversation as he slowly inched his way towards Haku and Fu's still be. He would only get one chance at this. Really, Guy? I don't think this is the time for that. I'm sure Hokage-sama will want this boy brought to him as soon as possible. Naruto winced again as his legs gave him trouble. It seemed there was no part of him left unscathed by the Gobi's violent introduction. Are my eternal rival speak the truth, of course. Come now, my young blonde friend, we will go to see the Hokage and everything will be sorted out as he is a most youthful leader. Naruto again ignored the pair. Although he was thankful for their bickering, it gave him more time than he thought. However, it still seemed fruitless as his body just wasn't responding how he wanted it to, far too damaged by the Five Tails intrusion. I think our Hokage is anything but youthful at this point. He did retire once already after all. Naruto would have breathed a sigh of relief if he didn't think it would draw too much attention to him. His body was still burning and there was still too much distance between him and his friends. Kakashi. Damn your hip attitude. How could you say such things about our Hokage-sama? Naruto cured silently in his head, hoping that these two would keep talking long enough for him to reach his friends was just asking too much. He had to improvise. How did you break out of the sand? Both Junin turned to him, broken from their bickering that probably would have down in a few more moments anyway. The lazy one seemed to regard the blonde with a hint of caution, his green-clad friend on the other hand. Why, with the power of my youth, of course. The man struck the most ridiculous pose Naruto had quite possibly ever seen. He didn't care though if it bought him more time to inch towards his friends. His cycloptic friend who had been identified as Kakashi, which struck a chord with Naruto for some reason although his pain-addled mind refused to draw any connections, simply sighed lightly. He was obviously used to this behavior. By that I guess you mean you used the gates. Guy just stuck his thumb out, giving a blinding smile that it took a great deal of Naruto's effort to ignore. By of course my hip friend, and naturally you used your Reikiri to escape our sandy bonds. Kakashi just shrugged non-committally again, seemingly unconcerned by Naruto's presence. The two Junin obviously thought the young blonde had nowhere to go, surrounded by a village of shinobi that was slowly freeing themselves as they spoke. Naruto wanted them to think that he was cornered with no option of escape. They probably wouldn't lower the guard as Junin, but at least they might take their time. It was that or call Pakken and he gets grumpy when I summon him this late in the afternoon. Guy just nodded in understanding. Naruto couldn't care less though, he had already known there were people breaking out of his sand technique. In fact, these were probably the two he had felt escape almost immediately after capturing, a testament to their skill. Why did you take so long to find me? Now Naruto was really stalling. He only needed a few more feet for this to work, and by now he was desperately struggling to keep the strain out of his voice and his posture from slumping. Thankfully Guy seemed to take the bait, even in Kakashi seemed more than cautious of him. We were attempting to help out our youthful comrades, although I must profess the sand technique you used proved difficult to deal with. But those in the springtime of their youth would prevail. Already I'm sure my students would be free and helping out their fellow leaf shinobi. He said it with a great deal of confidence, but Naruto wasn't too sure. Even in his weakened state, a genin would be no match for his sand, even when he was first learning Shukaku's abilities. Even Gaara, when he first met the lonely redhead, would have been able to deal with most genin and even Chunin. That's good. Both Junin paused as Naruto looked up, briefly captivating them with his violet, rippled eyes. It didn't seem to matter anymore if people saw, considering he had showed the entire village. Using so much of Shukaku's chakra had actually given him faint, temporary rings around both of his eyes, but he didn't know that. It somehow added to the general mystique of his appearance. You treasure your comrades, your friends, and precious people. The blonde sighed as he began circulating chakra through his body again, visibly wincing from the pain of the action. In that way I hope you understand why I do this, for my friends. His eyes snapped open as the innermost rings of his Rinnegan briefly bulged outwards. Shinra Tensei. Both Junin were caught completely unaware as they were sent hurtling back by a wall of unseen force, crashing back into the walls of the collapsing building. Naruto had held back a great deal. He hadn't wanted to seriously hurt the men after all, but he at least allowed for the fact they were experienced Junin and wouldn't be hurt so easily. Even though his body burned like a fire had been lit inside him, he managed just barely to concentrate his chakra long enough to run through a few hand seals, not having the concentration to do it without. Kuchios. A large cloud of white smoke added to the pre-existing shroud of dust he had created with the gravity technique, masking the creature he had summoned. When it cleared, an enormous grey-feathered, drill-beaked monstrosity of a bird took off, rapidly flying off north. Hiruzen arrived at the scene just in time to see Kakashi and Guy spring back to their feet, looking up at the creature as it flew off. After a moment of hesitation, he began issuing orders to have as many Konoha Anbu released as soon as possible, a few of which would be used to track the bird while the rest continued to free more of the village. However, it seemed as though there was no need. Mid-order, the sand that had held the entire village captive suddenly lost its energy, falling away to become earth once again. The released ninja all breathed a sigh of relief after coming so close to being mercilessly crushed, not knowing Naruto would never resort to such measures. Even the Iwa and Oto shinobi had lost their fight. Knowing they were surrounded in a village, they had lost the element of surprise over. Hiruzen gazed out at all this impassively, his features in the perfect mask of a commanding cage. However, as he looked up at the sky, he couldn't help the frown that overcame his face as the bird passed right over the Hokage monument, just above the bust of the Yondaime. From a few feet away, Naruto watched the shinobi all scurry about as he finally released his hold over the sand confining them. The chameleon he was inside, as much as it grossed him out, stood perfectly still, ready to leave as soon as there was an opening. It understood that the best time to leave would be while the shinobi was still occupied with the enormous number of enemy forces within their walls. He spared a glance over at the still unconscious forms of Haku and Fu, hoping that they wouldn't wake up before him, otherwise they might freak out over their location. And with that last thought, Naruto promptly passed out, finally succumbing to the strain his body was so violently protesting over. The blonde was fairly unsurprised when he awoke to find himself staring up at the drab, uninteresting ceiling of the corridors that marked his seal. As he had suspected, the floor was wet with the corrosive, unpleasant liquid that dripped from the pipes, or as the case was now, gushed. A new pipe had nestled its way into the many that already occupied the corridors, however calling it a pipe would be doing it too much justice. It seemed to be more of a twisted wreck of metal, wet with the liquid that represented the gobi's chakra. He groaned as he got to his feet. It seemed even within the seal he wasn't able to escape the burning that engulfed his body. However, it thankfully had down to an uncomfortable, but tolerable ache throughout his being. Slowly, and with a great deal more effort than it would normally take, he made his way through the now too familiar path toward the cell room that, if the pattern held, would now be octagonal. Already he was listening out for the sound of banging bars and angered roars that usually accompanied the arrival of another biju within his growing family. For a moment he paused at that thought before continuing on with a small smile. He supposed it was true he had somewhat come to see his tenants, new and old, as some form of a dysfunctional family. Over the last year traveling, when he had little else to do or was simply feeling curious about something, he would take solace within these imaginary walls. Shukaku was like a little brother, one that needed guiding and caring for as well as a lot of maintenance. Matatabi was like a sister, easily the most relatable of the biju he carried due to her past experiences cooperating with humans. She had proved the most helpful of his tenants when it came to him seeking knowledge on something as well as generally being the most fun to talk to. At first she had been very polite with him, formal almost, however that phase quickly passed once they actually began to talk. Now he saw her for what she really was, a playful if not slightly mischievous cat that saw all the time she had to spare as a challenge to alleviate boredom whenever she could. Isabu he still didn't know all that well, she was very quiet most of the time, much preferring her solace within the cell as opposed to any genuine interaction. Naruto respected that as he had for the monks that were the same in the temple, although when the turtle did speak it was usually with an unerringly calm demeanor that only the Kyuubi seemed able to easily ignore. Son Goku on the other hand was much easier to figure out. He was a prideful and brash gorilla that thought that a conflict ending in violence was one well dealt with. The Kyuubi was still just the mystery he had been since Naruto had first spoken with him. Even that entire year had done barely anything to crack the icy, angry shell the fox had confined himself to. It often took a lot of pushing from the blonde to get the ancient fox to reveal anything, and when he did the creature made it sound like he was doing the boy a great favor that Naruto didn't deserve. It was a struggle each and every day with him as a tenant, but for some strange reason Naruto always enjoyed their banter. He guessed he saw the fox as the ultimate challenge. Oddly enough, when he rounded the corner into the expansive, seemingly ceiling-less room, there was no banging, no aggravated roars or even disgruntled shouts. In fact, he was slightly unnerved by how unnaturally quiet it seemed, especially considering Shukaku hadn't loudly announced his arrival like usual. Although it quickly became apparent why when he spotted the enormous tanuki quietly snoring in his cell, probably tired out from what Naruto had him doing for so long. The other biju were just as quiet though, which was also highly strange. Matatabi was looking at him with concern while Isabu had retreated back into the darkness of her cell. Well, maybe that wasn't too strange. Even the Kyuubi was simply watching him carefully with one large red eye, his pupils sparkling with interest, amusement, condescension. It was hard to tell with the ancient fox, but there was obviously something the kitsune found interesting if he had actually bothered to look up. Recently the Kyuubi had taken to a policy of ignoring Naruto as much as possible. It was nicer than the outright loathing from before, but it made it more difficult to talk with him. So you are the one that removed me from Han. Finally Naruto took notice of the newest addition to the seal, taking up the cell between Son Goku's and the Kyuubi's. He wasn't quite sure what to make of the gobi, literally, he wasn't even sure what the creature was supposed to be. It had the body of a large white stallion obviously. However, the head was sleeker, bearing a larger, slightly protruding lower jaw. It had white fur, maybe, it was difficult to tell if it was fur or something else from this distance. It also had 4 symmetrical horns atop its head, looking as though they had been slicked back to match the general shape of the bijuu's head. If the blonde had to guess, he would say the beast was some combination of a horse and a dolphin, making it the Gobi no Irakawa. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto winced at how weak he sounded right now, however the pain hadn't simply vanished, it still burned in his body, reminding him of what awaited him when he woke up. The Gobi simply observed him though, lowering its head to gaze at the monk with its large, piercing blue eyes. Why is it you bear a striking resemblance to the sage? Despite being phrased as such, it really wasn't a question, more of a demand, even though the five tails managed to speak with a perfectly level, if not slightly cold tone. Not only that, but you bear the Rinnegan, what mockery is this? Why have I been brought here? The Gobi looked up, glancing around at the other cells, occupied with the majority of his fellow Biju. He could even feel the presence of Chume even if he couldn't see her, which meant the Hachibi and Rokubi were the only ones not present. It's true I possess the Rinnegan, and I am a monk like I'm told the sage was before me, but I can't say how you ended up here. I had no intention of transferring you to my body. The gaze of the dolphin horse quickly found its way back to the monk as its head lowered again, however it never went as low as to place Naruto on the same level. It took another calculating look before huffing loudly, reminding Naruto of the dismissive nature of the Kyuubi. You speak above your grade, human. You are all the same, conceited, selfish and treacherous. Just because you possess eyes that bear a passing resemblance to that of our fathers speaks nothing to me. The Gobi looked up, glancing around at its fellow Biju with those same narrowed eyes before they finally fell on the Kyuubi. What is it this child speaks of Ku? Everybody in the room, Biju included, was made silent as all at once the Kyuubi s all of its tails into the ground, see the Gobi off before it could finish with a tremendous crash. His red eyes captivated the five tails with the intensity of his seething glare. Don't you dare speak my name, you insolent colt. It seems that time away from me has only rendered your abilities to sense the superiority of others as useless as the rest of you. The Kyuubi spoke with a low, menacing growl that carried across far more of his hatred and loathing than any rage-filled shout ever could. Successfully cowed, the Gobi backed away from that intense glare, head lowered in submission as the larger and far more powerful Kyuubi made his dominance known. The Biju may not have appreciated the Nine Tails' sense of superiority, but they could not argue it wasn't well founded. As for why you are here, the insane dog over there became overzealous in his effort to please his father. The Kyuubi couldn't have kept the conceit out of his voice if he had bothered to try, practically coating the word in sarcasm and disgust. The fool of a boy allowed the tanuki free rein within his sand, giving him access to what he calls the predator paths. No doubt the bloated sand dune thought he was being helpful. The fox snorted loudly at that, but seemed to be done for the meantime as he rested his head down on his paws, this time not even deigning to watch as he closed his large eyes. Naruto had almost missed the tail end of their conversation though. The pain in his body had grown steadily worse throughout the entire conversation, and right now it was reaching an unholy crescendo. B pumped loudly through his ears and he could practically feel his skin bursting into flames spontaneously. Even as the enormous dolphin horse turned to look at him, its head significantly lower from the verbal thrashing from the Kyuubi, he was struggling to stand straight. This changes nothing, human. Any resemblance to the sage is nothing. You are not him, and I will not be cowed by the likes of a filthy human. Naruto couldn't even reply. He felt the pain reach new heights through his body before everything went black, again. Naruto didn't even bother to groan as he languidly managed to lift his aching body up into a sitting position. He was in too much pain to bother. The first thing he noticed was the gentle breeze blowing through his hair. Luckily it was the good kind, not caused by the slow breathing of a large chameleon summon. Blearily, and with a great deal of hesitancy, he managed to open his eyes, wary in case he needed to them shut again. Thankfully it seemed night had fallen and only the soft glow of the moon hanging over their heads illuminated the small forest clearing they were in. For a moment he was worried about how long they had been left here in case any shinobi patrols of wherever they were decided to show up. Based on the fact they were in a thick forest of familiar trees and there was a distinct lack of mist, he would say they were still in Hai no Kuni. However, his worries were somewhat alleviated when he spotted the chakra signature and subtle ripple in the air that betrayed the location of the chameleon summon. It was nestled in the branches of a tree, skillfully concealing itself in case any shinobi came up. Thank you. He waved to the chameleon that had made itself visible after seeing Naruto was awake. The blonde wasn't sure if the creature could talk, but it did nod its head, flicking its long tongue out once before vanishing in a burst of smoke. The bird he had summoned had probably vanished the moment he fell unconscious, as it wasn't a true summon, but he hoped it had at least flown far enough away to provide a decent distraction for the chameleon to make a mistake. Looking around at the fact they were no longer within Konoha's walls, he guessed that much was true. Ow. Fuu's monotone voice roused him from his introspection as the mint-haired Jinchuriki lifted herself up on her arms, wincing as the few burn marks had remained since the day before made movement unpleasant. Are you okay? The girl looked around at him, before glancing about at their surroundings, making no indication she thought it was odd they were outside of Konoha. I believe so, nothing another night of rest will not fix. Naruto nodded at that. Despite having the most outward signs that she was injured, Fu would probably be the fastest to recover out of the three of them. Haku's hands wouldn't be repaired anytime soon, even with Fu and Naruto there to help the healing along, and despite Naruto's absurdly fast, almost regenerative healing factor, the chakra system was a very delicate and fragile thing. He wouldn't be completely back to full health for at least another week, if that. It didn't help that there were currently no medical ninjutsu that dealt with the repair of the chakra system, mostly because nobody but a Hyuga could see it and they preferred to attack the system more than treat it. Well, we probably won't be able to travel for a few more days, at least not until Haku and I are recovered. Both spared a glance towards their unconscious friend, huddled up on the floor and cradling his hands, even in his sleep. The blotchiness had only gotten worse since the other day and had spread further up his arms. Little red pinpricks dotted the skin where the boy had severely overused his delicate tenketsu. Naruto or Fu would probably have to create a salve for that to ease the burning the Hyotenuser would no doubt be feeling when he woke up. Ugh. However, Naruto had to reckon that as he tried to shift positions only for an arc of pain to lance through his body, that extraction really had screwed up his body. It would be Fu doing all the work over the next few days, as guilty as that made Naruto feel. His abused body just wasn't up to it. On second thought, we'll probably be here for around a week. Might as well make ourselves comfortable in this clearing. Fu nodded absently as she stood up, only wincing slightly from the burns littering her skin. Naruto had to give her credit for her ability to mask what was obviously an incredibly painful injury. His eyes did widen though as she slowly moved across the clearing, setting herself down next to him and lightly leaning her body against his side, making sure to position herself to take the strain off her burned skin. What are you doing? Naruto had an eyebrow raised as he spoke, genuine curiosity in his voice. He was used to waking with Fu sleeping right next to him, but it was usually at least more subtle than this. It seemed in her pained state and the generally injured condition of the group, she had given up on pretenses of caring. Making myself comfortable. Naruto just sighed at the small, mischievous smile Fu was giving him. He supposed he should be thankful she was able to give that much. The Fu he had met 2 years ago would never have been able to express herself like that. He leant back against the tree he was sitting against, just enjoying the company and warmth the girl offered as his thoughts drifted onto other things. Did you have trouble escaping the village? He looked around, noting that Fu was still shuffling against him, trying to find the most comfortable position. I'm not sure. I was unconscious when the chameleon carried us out. Fu nodded before pausing, looking down at her body and giving her arm an experimental sniff. That is an unpleasant image. Naruto had to agree with her there. Sitting inside the mouth of a chameleon, no matter how trustworthy, was not only disgusting, but also rather nerve-wracking. Being eaten was definitely not one of the ways he had ever imagined himself leaving this world. Tell me about it. Other than that though, I suppose there were these two strange Junin. Quote. The blonde trailed off as his eyes widened, his memories coming back and hitting him full force. The silver hair, the tilted headband, he wasn't sure how he hadn't recognized the man before, hell he had even heard his name before blacking out. His eyes narrowed in immediate concern. He had known in his pain and disorientation that things weren't coming through as clearly as they should, but to forget the man who had driven his lightning-coated hand through one of his friend's shoulders. This seriously unsettled Naruto. If he could forget Kakashi in his pained, hazy-minded state, especially when he hadn't forgotten anything since gaining the Rinnegan, then what other damage could the impromptu extraction have done? For that matter, he wasn't even sure if the other Jinchuriki was okay. The extraction had happened much faster than he was used to. Sure, the chakra had been extracted evenly from the man thanks to the sand being fully wrapped around him, but at that speed, who was to say? The thought made him slightly queasy. What if he had the Gobi's Jinchuriki by accident? He had never meant for that. Hell, he had never even meant to extract the Biju at all. However, through it all he couldn't find it in himself to be mad at Shukaku. Like the Kyubi had said, the Tanuki was probably doing what he thought was helpful to his father. He sighed wearily. He didn't have the answers and might never get them, but that didn't make the knowledge rest any easier in the back of his mind. It was at that moment he realized Fu was looking up at him, watching him curiously with her sharp orange eyes. What is it? The girl looked down, obviously embarrassed at getting caught staring while Naruto was so obviously lost in his own thoughts. However, she was still Fu and not even a hint of a blush managed to creep onto her tanned skin. I've never seen you injured like this before. The blonde blinked at that, his eyes looking past the girl to his side as he thought about it. His expression shifted into one of surprise when he realized Fu was right. He really hadn't ever been that injured or even sick around her before, even during the civil war in Mizuno Kuni. In fact, for as long as he could remember, he had never actually been as badly injured or hurt as he was now. It makes you seem more human. Naruto blinked in surprise at that as well. I don't seem human to you. His voice was tinged with amusement, but Fu looked down again, frowning, obviously that hadn't come out quite the way she meant it. You do, it's just, for as long as I've known you. She shook her head slowly. Ever since you saved me from Takagakure, you always seemed so invincible. She looked up, surprising Naruto with the emotion in her eyes. He rarely ever saw her like this. It's different. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that as Fu once again looked away, losing her nerve as she was unable to meet his eye. Different, good. Fu coughed into her hand lightly, shifting her body off of Naruto and standing up. I should go and gather the herbs for Haku's salve, otherwise he will be in a lot of pain when he wakes up. Naruto nodded slowly, intrigued by what Fu seemed to be trying to say but willing to let her come to terms with it in her own time. All right, don't go too far. The green-haired girl offered a brief smile before walking off, leaving Naruto alone with Haku's still unconscious body. He sighed momentarily, wondering how other people dealt with confusing moments such as these. Hey Temari, are you okay? The ponytailed blonde looked up from where she had been absently staring at the road in front of them. The entire Suna delegation from the Chunin exams was making their way back towards their village. It was slow going though as many were shaken from what had happened in Konoha. It was Matsuri that had spoken, the younger girl walking beside her with concern in her eyes. Ah yeah, why? The brunette didn't seem so convinced as he features switched to a more stern look. If it's about what happened back there Temari. The blonde looked up, just a hint of misdirected anger leaking through her frustrated features. I said I didn't want to talk about it Matsuri. The younger girl looked away, a frown marring her face as they continued on in silence for a while. There wasn't a lot of conversation going between the shinobi. But isn't it a good thing? Temari sighed loudly as once again Matsuri decided the silence had become unbearable. I mean, doesn't this mean that Gaara's still alive? You're always talking about him, aren't you? Matsuri quietened down again when Temari sent her another irritated glare, quickening her footsteps despite already being towards the front of the group. I said I didn't want to talk about it Matsuri. Go bother Kankuro or something. The brown-haired girl sighed as she watched her friend and teammate walk off. She was just about old enough to remember Gaara, the scary boy that controlled the sand and wouldn't let other kids near him. She had always wondered if he was lonely, growing up like that and pushing everybody away. She had to admit that back there, trapped in all that sand like the rest of the shinobi, she was terrified. She had wondered with every breath if it would be her last. However, it hadn't come. She was still alive and as far as she knew so was everybody else, even so she could tell it was bothering her teammate. Temari often spoke of her little brother, wondering if he was alive and safe. She would have thought this would bring the girl some comfort, but obviously it was just weighing on her mind. She sighed in her head and looked around, wondering where Kankuro was. After all, he was Gaara's family as well. Kakashi leaned against his apartment balcony, his frown covered up by his ever-present mask as he stared out over the village. Anbu was still jumping about, clearing up any of the limited damages caused during the invasion. In truth though, the sand capturing all of the shinobi before the fighting could really get underway had limited that to a few broken buildings. In fact, not a single casualty had been reported yet, although there was still quite a bit of sand to sort through and Kakashi wasn't quite as connected to the reports as he had been in his own Anbu days. Right now though, his mind couldn't be further from the rest of the village though as he thought back to that encounter in the destroyed building. It had been dusty and he hadn't had his Sharingan active, but he was almost positive that had been Naruto. Yet he couldn't understand how. It had only been 2 months at most since the end of their mission to Wave, yet the boy he had met looked almost a year older than the young blonde they had come across in Nami no Kuni. Maybe it was just the dust playing tricks on him. The boy hadn't seemed to recognize him either, which was equally strange. His gaze drifted over to the Hokage Tower. It was conspicuously free of sand, as that had been one of the first places cleared once there were enough shinobi. He needed to see the Hokage again and ask him properly this time about all of this Naruto business. He couldn't keep hiding these things from him. He had a right to know about his sensei's legacy. However, the Hokage was busy sorting out the ramifications of the invasion, dealing with the political fallout of such a major event. The problem was all the Iwa shinobi, or more specifically what to do with them. There were too many to simply incarcerate. Konoha lacked the supplies or room to feed and house them all humanely. In the end, in some people's opinion too peaceful, Hokage had decided to let the Iwa shinobi go. Without their Tsuchikage they had given up almost without a fight, and having them within the village was more of a threat than letting them go. Either way, Iwa had suffered a humiliating defeat, with their completely ineffective invasion essentially being halted by one person, a teenager no less. The Oto shinobi were an entirely different matter. They now had proven connections with Orochimaru. Unfortunately for them, it seemed the Snake Sannin had some genuinely loyal followers, as the Anbu teams had found many Oto shinobis in the sand, broken cyanide capsules in their mouths. Others had chosen to flee as soon as the opportunity arose. They were being chased down even as he stood here. Finally, there were those that had surrendered fearfully. They were being kept in the cells below the tea and interrogation department, waiting for a turn with Ibiki or his equally skilled co-workers. However, right now Kakashi was more worried about his team. Sometime in the near future he was going to have to debrief them all on this. Kiba was still in the hospital from whatever it was Orochimaru had done to him in Training Ground 44, so he would probably gather them there. He knew Sasuke was going to be angry though. He had been interrupted before his match could even begin, and to humiliate him further he had been captured by the sand. Kakashi made a note to keep an eye on the young Uchiha. He had been even more distant ever since he had received the curse mark. The masked shinobi pondered all that for a moment before shrugging, allowing his one revealed eye to drift back down to the little orange book in his hand. It would probably all work out. Then again, his mind kept drifting back to what he had seen, that silhouette against the sun with the violet, ringed eyes. Come on, it has to be around here somewhere. Another groan of frustration sounded out through the misty forests where two young teenagers were currently trudging through. You said that for the last 7 places we checked. The girl leading the duo, with burnt orange hair and a far too peppy smile for the bleak atmosphere, simply turned to the boy behind her with a challenging smirk. So what? You saying we should give up? The boy following after her, with light blue hair and thick, rectangular glasses to complement his meek appearance, lugging an enormous, bandaged sword on his back, simply sighed. Maybe we should, I mean, is it really a good idea to be looking for it, Nezumiero? The identified Kiri Kanoiki simply put in a display of highly over-exaggerated shock and appall. How could you say that, Chojuro? Shizuku was our friend as well. How are we supposed to pay our respects if we can't even find her grave? The meek swordsman simply nodded slowly. They'd had this conversation many times before on these expeditions out into Mizu no Kuni to find where Naruto had buried Shizuku. Maybe Naruto didn't want it to be found. The bubble girl simply huffed dramatically as she turned on her heel, marching off again into the mist. Don't be so pessimistic, Chojuro, now come on, we're burning daylight here. The swordsman looked up, frowning at the weak sunlight that was actually able to stream through the heavy mist. How they were supposed to find anything in all this was beyond him. We're only out here because Mai-sama is your aunt, otherwise we would be helping with Kiri's reconstruction. His response was for Nezumiero to poke her tongue out at him childishly, although how anything that girl did could be called childish when everything she did was childish was also beyond him. Yeah, well, there's perks to being related to the Mizukage. Now hush up, you said you would help me with this and I said I would help you track down the rest of the 7 swords. Chojuro was about to protest, but another gleaming grin from Nezumiero had the words S on the end of his tongue. Yeah, okay Nezumiero. The orange-haired girl looked at him strangely or a moment before shrugging and carrying on. She could have sworn the boy looked oddly red for a moment there. Tsunade-sama, don't you think you're overdoing it slightly? Shizune winced slightly as Tsunade s down her 3rd successive bottle of sake, the the thick china making a distinctive click against the table of the bar they were sitting in. What are you talking about, Shizune? This is barely anything. There was an ever so slight slur to the busty blonde's voice, lending no credence to her statement whatsoever. The younger woman just frowned as her mentor and aunt lifted her hand, signaling for one of the many waiters to bring her another bottle of the sweet alcoholic drink. You would never drink this much if Naruto and Fu were still traveling with us. Despite the accusatory nature, there was no venom in Shizune's words, more of a quiet disappointment. She had been so happy to see Tsunade clean herself up a little with the blonde monk and his socially awkward mint-haired friend traveling with them. To see her slide right back into her old habits after so long was just saddening. For a few months Shizune had the aunt she remembered from back when her Uncle Dan was still alive, the assertive, powerful Kunoiki that had inspired her to become a medical nin. Yeah, well, Naruto and Fu aren't here right now, are they? Despite meaning for it to come out harshly, the blonde was surprised when she simply sounded tired. It's okay to admit you miss them, Tsunade-sama. I miss them both. The last Senju huffed indignantly at that, refusing to believe she had actually become so attached to the annoying little gaki that had incessantly bugged her for the last year, a year of her life she would never get back, mind you. Oh damn it, I miss them, don't I? Shizune smiled encouragingly at her mentor, getting up out of her chair and sitting down next to her in the booth, Tonton oinking comfortingly from her arms. Comforting for a pig anyway. Do you want to talk about it, Shushu? The older blonde looked up pitifully, for once at least somewhat looking her age. However, after a moment it had passed and a new fire was lit in her eyes, one that Shizune knew all too well. Ah damn, well, if I'm going to be getting into all this touchy-feely crap, I'm going to need a lot more sake. Barman, where's my drink? Shizune sunk back into her seat at that, desperately trying to pretend she didn't exist as Tsunade's overly loud and drunken shout reverberated throughout the entire bar. Beside her, Tonton rubbed her nose against Shizune's side, giving her a small oink of understanding that somehow didn't help all that much. Kabuto stood alert atop one of the few salvageable buildings in the district where the two Jinchuriki had fought it out. He couldn't believe his luck that Naruto's distraction, in the form of his sand, had actually allowed him to maintain his cover as a Konoha shinobi. He was sure Orochimaru would be pleased, especially as he was one of the Sannin's best spies in the village. Sure, Ibiki seemed to be suspicious of him, but that was nothing a few months of lying low wouldn't fix. Although he had to admit that it was rather embarrassing to have been caught in the sand, he would have to look into that. After all, he had, though the Ichibi container was the only one with those abilities. Right now he was doing his duty as a medical ninja, which meant being on standby if any of the Anbu found somebody injured. It had been pretty quiet so far though. However, not even as he was thinking that a cat-masked Anbu with long purple hair called him over to one of the more wrecked buildings that were a part of the fight. He was shown into a room that was practically submerged in sand. At the center were two Anbu pulling a giant of a man dressed in beat-up red armor that Kabuto immediately recognized. In what condition was he found in? He masked his recognition by switching over to a more professional attitude, swiftly striding over to the man as his hand lit up with green chakra. He was buried underneath the sand but was still breathing somehow. He's unresponsive. The Oto spy nodded as he began running the standard scans over the Gobi Jinchuriki, glad that he was the first one called here. However, an eyebrow rose when he realized that wasn't quite correct anymore, his hand lingering just a moment longer over Han's stomach. It's a case of severe chakra depletion. His tenketsu in many areas are burned out, but he should recover given time. That was underestimating the situation. It was a miracle the man had survived given the minimum chakra he was operating on. However, as the man was carried off by two Anbu and Kabuto walked away, a sky smile crept over his face. Orochimaru would find this very interesting indeed. The only thing that interrupted the oppressive silence that permeated the dank, dark cave was the slow, rhythmic dripping of water from stalacers. However, a new sound ripped through the stillness as one by one, 7 figures appeared as if out of thin air. Their forms were indistinct and fuzzy, only their outlines and eyes actually visible in the darkness of the lone cave. Each wore the same cloak, although any colors or patterns were lost in the inky monotone of the technique that had summoned them there. For a few moments they all stood in silence, awaiting the presence of their leader to begin things, however that quickly grew too long for one of them. Well, isn't this boring? I could be out heathens, but no, Leader Sama has me in here, surrounded by you and making me wait all day. 6 sets of eyes glared at the loud man, only identifiable by the large, 3-bladed scythe he had slung over his back. One of the figures in particular, with odd green eyes surrounded by distinct red sclera, glared hard enough that one might fear he would burn through the man with his gaze alone. Quiet, you religious ingrate, you're lucky I can't kill you, or I would have already turned in your useless head to the bounty offices. Although I suppose that wouldn't atop you rambling about your idiotic religion. The man with the scythe just huffed and crossed his arms over his sea, sending an equally scathing glare at the green-eyed man. You'll get yours, heathen. Any who blaspheme against the word of Jashan will bathe in the ecstasy of pain, especially you, who only cares about money. The man seemed satisfied at that, knowing that attacking his partner would only end badly. After all, he was the one who schooled him together again after particularly B encounters, not that it wouldn't happen on its own eventually. And why wouldn't I care about money? Money is everything in this life, without it no man could do anything. The first man just glared again, knowing that here, where none of them had a corporeal form, it was all he could do. What would you even do with money anyway? You're AF missing nin. The green-eyed man returned the gesture by crossing his arms and simply raising a brow. Wealth is not about spending money, but having it. The scythe wielder is about to retort when an 8th figure appeared in the room, separated from the rest by his distinctive eyes, his distinctive steel gray, rippled eyes. Quiet, hidden, Kakazu. I care little for your petty squabbles outside of these meetings, but we have more important things to discuss. His voice was deep and commanding, instantly capturing and holding the attention of those in the room. His steady, unwavering gaze drifted around the assembled members before narrowing in satisfaction. We are all here then. One of the other silhouetted men, one of the taller in the room with beady black eyes and a large object strapped to his back wrapped in what appeared to be bandages, cleared his tea. Will Conan Sama not be joining us today, Leader Sama? The rippled eyes of the organization's leader instantly flickered to the large man, easily one of the more powerful members of the organization. The whereabouts of my lieutenant are none of your concern, Kisum Hoshigek. Kisum looked down, looking somewhat disappointed at that. The leader ignored that though as his gaze moved to one of the stranger silhouettes, a hunched-over man that looked more like a turtle in a cloak than a human being. Sasori, what is the status of the Ichibi? The named puppeteer cleared his tea loudly as his bursome body shifted underneath his cloak. Despite my spy's best attempts, the Ichibi container has been difficult to track down since leaving Sunagakure. He has constantly kept on the move in those 3 years, and it is only recently I have managed to get a good idea where he is hiding. A few of my agents report somebody using Sanjutsu in Tano Kuni. The leader nodded slowly, absorbing the information. The Ichibi leaving Sunagakure had not been expected, but it was good they had not lost him completely. Find him, and this time, don't lose him. The man's deep, monotone voice had a tone of finality to it as he turned to the two that had been bickering to begin with. And what news of the Nibi? The 2 members of the organization spared a glance before the taller one spoke. As far as we know, she is still within Kumo's walls. Many of the bounty offices say they have clients complaining of a blonde-haired woman stealing all the missing nin like she's on some kind of purge. I'm sure it's her. Again there was a simply nod of acknowledgement from the man with rippled eyes. The Sanbi will still be regenerating after losing its host. That will be no issue for Itachi to subjugate when our plans begin in 3 years' time, will it? His gaze turned to the only other Dujutsu bearer in the small organization. Only the other man's eyes were a deep, unsettling red with 3 black tomos circling the pupil. Of course not, Leader Sama. The leader nodded again without any hesitation. You and Kisum were also assigned the Yonbi. It was spoken as a question, as much bass that one-toned voice could phrase such a thing. However, none of the members were foolish enough to believe it was anything but a statement of fact. He's some kind of traveling hermit. Kisum's low, naturally mocking voice seen. He roams around Tsuchi no Kuni as far as we can tell, shouldn't be too hard to track down. The leader paused this time before nodding. The man disliked Kisum's dismissive nature but tolerated it as long as he got the job done. The Gobi and Rokubi will be dealt with by me and Conan. Kakazu, you were assigned the Nanabi. Again nobody dared to question the assertion, however this time there was a lot more hesitancy from the greedy Takagakure missing nin. She is still missing, no sign of her from any of my sources. The steel gray eyes of the organization's leader narrowed dangerously at that, making Kakazu nervous. The gaze was enough to make weaker men tremble. We have time before the plan begins in full. You will find her. Kakazu nodded swiftly, not wanting to be under the powerful man's eye longer than he needed to be. He was greedy, not foolish. The Hachibi is often cited in Kumogakur. When the time comes I will collect him myself if I must. Nobody there dared point out that it would be one man versus an entire hidden village. They were under no illusions he could not do it. Then I guess that leaves us, right, Leader Sama? After all, you wouldn't trust anybody else with the most important of the 9, would you? The one man that hadn't spoken yet, if you could call the strange creature a man, decided to speak up from the corner. He wore the same cloak as everybody else. However, he had large protrusions emerging from his shoulders that gave him the distinct likeness of a Venus flytrap. Even more disturbing was the fact he spoke with 2 completely different voices, one deep and aggressive while the other was light and carefree. Zetsu. It was more of an acknowledgement than an actual greeting. The leader preferred to keep his interactions with the plant hybrid to the minimal. Well, I'm afraid, Leader Sama, that the QB remains as elusive as ever. We thought he was at the fire temple, but he's gone now. Vanished just like that. Some kind of traveling monk now, so he might be hard to track down. Vanished like poof. The half of the man that was seemingly shrouded in even more darkness grimaced while the lighter half giggled to himself. The leader didn't frown at the information, not betraying his irritation at the news that not 1, but 3 of the Jinchuriki were completely unaccounted for. Is there no information on his whereabouts? The plant man creature shrugged nonchalantly, possibly the only one in the organization that would dare to do that to the leader. We were watching over the reconstruction of Kirigakure like you told us. We did hear of some kind of invasion in Konoha though. Apparently Orochimaru was involved. We could send a clone to check it out. The leader's eyes narrowed at the information and moved away from the plant hybrid. No need. Sasori, contact your informants within Orochimaru's so-called village and finds out about this invasion, and keep looking for the whereabouts of our last ring. The sealing process will be slow without it. The stoic man cast one last glance around the room with his powerful, almost glowing eyes before nodding once. The rest of you are dismissed. And with that his indistinct silhouette blinked out of existence. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.